Before you listen to another voice, before you explain yourself one more time, before you reveal what God whispered to your spirit in the quiet, pause, because what you are about to hear is not just a message. It is a warning wrapped in grace, a revelation wrapped in fire. There are things heaven entrusted to you that were never meant for public conversation. There are movements in your life that lose power the moment they are spoken too soon. And if you've ever wondered why some of your breakthroughs felt delayed, why certain dreams turned into battles the moment you shared them, then listen closely. Because this is where silence becomes sacred and where wisdom separates destiny from distraction. Have you ever shared something precious, something deeply personal, something that felt like it came straight from God, only to watch it slowly fall apart right after you spoke it out loud? It didn't feel random, and it wasn't coincidence, because there is a spiritual principle many overlook, a divine pattern that reveals itself only to those who learn the discipline of silence. And that truth is this: not everything God gives you is meant to be announced. Some things are meant to be protected, nurtured, and walked out quietly before they are ever revealed publicly. God never instructed you to broadcast your next move. He instructed you to move with obedience, with faith, and with trust, even when no one else understands what you are doing. The moment you begin to speak prematurely about what has not yet taken form, you open doors not just to opinions, but to unseen resistance, to doubt that doesn't belong to you, to jealousy that hides behind smiles, and to spiritual interference that was never assigned to your journey until you gave it access through your words. There is a reason wisdom teaches that there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Yet so many people reverse that order, speaking in seasons where silence is required and remaining silent when boldness is necessary. And this misalignment often becomes the very reason their progress feels hindered. Think deeply about the story of Joseph, not just as a historical account, but as a spiritual blueprint. Because his dream was never the problem, the vision itself was divinely inspired. But the timing of his sharing turned a promise into a battlefield. It exposed something sacred to people who were not prepared to celebrate it. And instead of support, it attracted opposition. Instead of covering, it invited conflict. Not everyone who listens to you is aligned with you, and that truth is difficult but necessary to accept. Because some people will hear your vision and smile outwardly while internally resisting everything God is trying to build within you. And that silent resistance carries weight. It carries influence, and it can disrupt your spiritual atmosphere if you are not discerning. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is strategy. Silence is protection. Silence is how you preserve momentum when something is still forming, because once something is exposed too early, it becomes vulnerable to contamination, to voices that did not contribute to its creation but feel entitled to critique its existence. If God did not authorize the audience, then sharing becomes a risk rather than a release. And many delays in life are not due to lack of blessing, but due to premature exposure. Results will always speak louder than explanations. And when God truly establishes something in your life, it will not require constant defense, justification, or validation from others. It will stand on its own because it carries divine backing. Now consider your spiritual battles, the internal wars, the moments where your faith is tested, where your strength feels stretched, where your spirit is in deep conversation with God. These are not always meant for public discussion, because some battles are designed to be fought in prayer, not explained in conversation. And the moment you begin to explain them to the wrong people, you unknowingly give them influence over something they were never equipped to understand. The truth is, not everyone has the spiritual capacity to carry what you carry. Some will misunderstand it. Some will judge it, some will even weaponize it, not always intentionally, but because they lack the depth to perceive it correctly. Scripture reminds us that our warfare is not against flesh and blood, yet many involve flesh and blood in battles that require spiritual alignment, and that misplacement of trust often leads to confusion, discouragement, and unnecessary emotional weight. Even Jesus, in his earthly walk, did not reveal every struggle, every burden, or every moment of pressure to the crowd. There were conversations he reserved only for the Father. There were moments he withdrew, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, because he understood that not every environment is suitable for every revelation. You do not need a crowd to win a war, you need alignment, you need clarity, you need connection with God that is uninterrupted by noise. And then there is the matter of your next blessing, the thing you have been praying for, believing for, holding on to through faith even when evidence seems absent. Understand this deeply. God does not require you to announce what He is preparing, because the fastest way to contaminate a blessing is to expose it before its appointed time. When you begin to tell the wrong people what you are expecting, you are not just sharing hope. You are opening the door to mixed energy, to prayers that may not carry faith, to responses that may sound supportive but lack sincerity, and sometimes even to subtle resistance that delays what could have arrived smoothly. Not every "I'm happy for you" is rooted in purity. Not every agreement is aligned with your elevation. And this is why divine wisdom often calls for quiet expectation, for a sacred space where your hopes remain between you and God, untouched by external influence. Some doors in your life will only open when no one knows you are knocking. Some breakthroughs will only manifest when they are cultivated in secrecy. Because silence keeps expectation pure, it keeps your faith focused, it keeps your spirit anchored in God rather than in people's reactions. And when the blessing finally arrives, it will not need announcement. It will be evident, undeniable, and unshakable. And if something inside you is awakening right now, if you are beginning to recognize the areas where you spoke too soon, trusted too widely, or exposed what should have been protected, then do not carry guilt, carry wisdom, because this is not about regret, it is about realignment. And what you guard from this moment forward has the power to reshape everything that comes next. There are moments in life when God goes quiet, not because He has abandoned you, but because He is doing something so sacred, so delicate, so transformational within you that it cannot survive the noise of explanation, the pressure of opinions, or the weight of human misunderstanding. And if you misinterpret that silence, if you try to fill it by exposing what He is still shaping, you may interrupt what heaven is carefully aligning, so listen closely. Because what God is doing in hidden places is often more powerful than what you see in public. Not everyone deserves access to your weak moments, and that truth carries more weight than most people are willing to accept. Because vulnerability without discernment becomes exposure. And exposure in the wrong environment does not lead to healing. It leads to labeling, misunderstanding, and sometimes even quiet judgment that lingers long after you have already moved forward. There are people who do not listen to help you heal. They listen to collect information, to store fragments of your lowest moments, not always with malicious intent, but with a lack of spiritual maturity that prevents them from covering you with love, and instead causes them to define you by what you revealed instead of who you are becoming. The scripture teaches that love covers a multitude of sins, but it does not say that everyone operates in love, and this is where discernment becomes essential, because revealing your brokenness to someone who lacks compassion can turn your process into a permanent label in their mind. And even after God has restored you, even after He has lifted you, even after He has transformed you completely, they may still interact with an outdated version of you that no longer exists. That is why so much of God's healing happens in private, not because He is hiding you, but because He is protecting the integrity of your transformation. Because some processes cannot survive public commentary, some restorations require sacred space, and some breakthroughs must be nurtured away from the noise until they are strong enough to stand on their own. Healing is not always loud, it is often quiet. It is often unseen. It is often a series of silent prayers, internal shifts, tears that no one witnesses, and moments where God is rebuilding something deep within your soul that words could never fully capture. When you begin to understand this, you stop feeling the need to explain your journey to everyone. You stop seeking validation for what God is already confirming within you. And you begin to embrace the power of sacred silence, a silence that does not isolate you, but refines you, strengthens you, and aligns you more deeply with divine purpose. What God is healing in you is not always meant to be displayed in real time, because exposure too early can reopen wounds that are in the process of closing. And the very thing that God is restoring can become fragile again under the weight of external opinions, questions, and misunderstandings. There are people who will ask how you are doing, but they do not know how to intercede for you. They do not know how to cover you in prayer. They observe more than they uplift. And while their curiosity may seem harmless, their lack of spiritual depth can unintentionally interfere with your process. This is why wisdom teaches you to be selective, not secretive out of fear, but intentional out of understanding, recognizing that not every ear is assigned to your story, and not every heart is equipped to handle your truth. When God is rebuilding you, correcting you, reshaping you, and preparing you for what is next, that process is often too delicate for commentary, because unfinished work invites unnecessary opinions, and opinions can become distractions that slow down what God is trying to complete. What is under construction requires protection, not exposure. It requires patience, not explanation, and it requires trust. Trust that God does not need public acknowledgement to perform private miracles. And then there is the reality of your past identity, the version of you that no longer aligns with who you are today. The mistakes you made, the seasons you survived, the struggles you overcame, understand this clearly. Not everyone needs access to that chapter of your life, because while God has forgiven it, healed it, and redeemed it, people do not always update their perception of you. Some individuals will continue to revisit a version of you that God has already closed. They will remind you of what you used to be instead of recognizing who you have become. And if you continuously expose your past to the wrong audience, you give them permission to hold you in a place that God has already moved you out of. God removes labels, but people often reuse them. And this is why guarding your story becomes an act of self-respect and spiritual awareness. Because your past was a chapter, not the title of your life. And you do not owe anyone access to a season that God has already redeemed. Your identity is no longer defined by where you have been. It is defined by where God is taking you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is allow your transformation to speak without constantly explaining its origin. And then there is your inner peace, that quiet, steady, unshakable calm that God places within you after you have walked through storms, after you have surrendered control, after you have learned to trust Him in ways you never did before. Understand this. Peace does not survive constant explanation, because the more you try to defend it, justify it, or prove it to others, the more you disturb the very thing God settled within you. Some people will question your peace, not because it is invalid, but because it exposes their unrest. Your calm becomes uncomfortable for those who are still consumed by chaos, and instead of seeking understanding, they may challenge what they do not recognize. This is where silence becomes protection again, because what God has established within you does not require public agreement. It requires consistency. It requires you to remain grounded even when others do not understand your stillness. If your peace cost you prayer, surrender, discipline, and tears, then it does not owe anyone explanation. It does not need to be defended, and it does not need to be justified. It simply needs to be maintained. Not everything that is hidden is wrong. Some things are hidden because they are holy, because they are sacred, because they are still in the hands of God, being shaped, refined, and prepared for the right moment of revelation. Before you speak, there must be a pause, a moment of reflection where you ask yourself a deeper question, not "Do I feel like sharing this?" but "Did God instruct me to share this?" Because there is a difference between seeking validation and walking in obedience, and many mistakes happen when emotions override discernment. If you are honest with yourself, there have been moments where you shared not because you were led, but because you wanted reassurance, because you wanted someone to confirm what God had already spoken. And while that desire is human, it can lead to unnecessary complications when placed in the wrong hands. Silence is not about isolation. It is about alignment. It is about recognizing that some things grow best in private, that some seeds require darkness before they break through the surface, and that some of the most powerful moves in your life will happen quietly before they are ever seen publicly. And as this truth settles into your spirit, understand that silence is not something you lose. It is something you are entrusted with. It is a form of stewardship, a sacred responsibility to guard what God has placed within you. Because what you protect today may be the very thing that defines your tomorrow. And in the next part, you will begin to see what happens when God starts removing people who were never meant to have the level of access you once gave them. There comes a moment in your life when what God is doing within you becomes so real, so undeniable, that it begins to separate you from people, from environments, from patterns you once thought were permanent. And if you are not spiritually prepared, you may misinterpret this separation as loss, when in reality it is protection, it is alignment, it is divine intervention removing what can no longer go where you are going. So do not resist what God is refining. Because what feels like distance is often destiny rearranging itself in your favor. When God begins to shift your life, one of the first signs is not always visible blessing but invisible separation, a quiet removal of access, a subtle distancing from people who once had proximity to your thoughts, your plans, your emotions, and your inner world. And this process can feel confusing if you are not discerning, because it does not always come with explanation. It does not always come with closure, and it rarely comes with mutual understanding, yet it carries divine purpose. There are individuals who were assigned to a previous version of you, people who fit your past mindset, your past struggles, your past identity. But as God begins to elevate you, to heal you, to transform you, those same connections can become misaligned, not because they are bad, but because they are no longer aligned with where you are being led. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They try to hold on to what God is releasing. They try to maintain access where God is creating distance. And in doing so, they unintentionally slow down their own growth because they are clinging to familiarity instead of embracing transformation. Not every separation is an attack. Some separations are answers to prayers you forgot you prayed, moments where you asked God for growth, for clarity, for elevation. And He responded not just by adding new things, but by removing what no longer fits the life He is preparing you for. The difficulty is that removal rarely feels comfortable. It often feels like rejection, like abandonment, like misunderstanding. But if you look deeper, You will begin to see that what God removes is often what was limiting you, distracting you, or keeping you connected to a version of yourself that you were never meant to remain in. There are people who had too much access to you, not because they earned it, but because you gave it freely without discernment. And when God begins to reduce that access, it is not punishment, it is protection. It is Him reclaiming the sacred spaces of your life so that they can be filled with purpose instead of confusion. Access is powerful because what people can reach, they can influence, and what they can influence, they can either strengthen or weaken. And if God sees that certain influences are not aligned with your next season, He will begin to close those doors, even if you do not immediately understand why. Some conversations will become less frequent. Some relationships will feel distant. Some connections will fade without conflict. And while your natural instinct may be to chase, to fix, to restore what once was, wisdom will remind you that not everything that ends is meant to be revived, and not every door that closes is meant to be reopened. Growth requires release, and release requires trust. Trust that God sees what you cannot see, that He understands what you do not yet understand, and that He is positioning you for something greater than what you are leaving behind. And as this process unfolds, you may notice something else, a shift within yourself, a desire for deeper peace, for more intentional conversations, for environments that do not drain your energy but instead nourish your spirit. And this is not you becoming distant. This is you becoming aligned. This is you stepping into a higher level of awareness where you no longer feel the need to explain your boundaries, justify your silence, or maintain connections that compromise your growth. Boundaries are not rejection, they are clarity. They are a reflection of what you value, what you protect, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. And when God refines you, your boundaries become stronger, not out of pride, but out of purpose. There will be people who do not understand this change, who question your distance, who interpret your silence as disconnection. But what they fail to see is that your silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is you being anchored in something deeper than external validation. It is you recognizing that not every relationship requires constant access to remain meaningful. Some connections are seasonal, and holding on to them beyond their season can create unnecessary tension, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. When you accept that not everyone is meant to journey with you indefinitely, you free yourself from the pressure of trying to maintain what God is naturally allowing to shift, and you begin to move with greater peace, greater clarity, and greater confidence in His direction. And as people are removed, something powerful begins to happen. Space is created, space for new connections, for divine alignments, for relationships that are rooted in purpose rather than convenience. And these new alignments will not require you to shrink, to explain, or to prove yourself. They will recognize your growth, respect your boundaries, and support your journey without needing constant access to every detail of your life. This is the beauty of divine timing, that as God removes what no longer fits, He prepares what does. And when the right people enter your life, there will be a sense of peace, not pressure, a sense of understanding, not confusion, and a sense of alignment that does not require force. But even in this, the principle remains the same. Not everything needs to be shared, not everything needs to be explained. Because the wisdom of silence does not end once you learn it. It becomes a lifestyle, a way of moving, a way of protecting what matters most. Your future plans still require discernment. Your spiritual battles still require prayer over explanation. Your blessings still require quiet expectation. Your healing still requires sacred space, and your peace still requires protection. This is not about becoming closed off. It is about becoming intentional. It is about recognizing that access is a privilege, not a right, and that what God entrusts to you must be handled with care, with wisdom, and with spiritual awareness. When you live this way, you begin to notice a shift, not just in your circumstances, but in your entire perspective. You become less reactive, less dependent on external validation, and more anchored in your relationship with God. And from that place, everything changes. Your decisions, your relationships, your direction, all begin to reflect a deeper level of alignment that cannot be shaken by opinions or disrupted by misunderstanding. So now the question is no longer what have you been sharing, but what will you begin to guard, what will you protect, what will you keep between you and God moving forward, because your silence is not empty. It is powerful, it is purposeful, it is prophetic, and what you choose to protect today will shape the doors that open tomorrow. So stand firm, move wisely, guard what is sacred. And if this message has awakened something in your spirit, let it become more than inspiration, let it become transformation. Because the life God is preparing for you will not be built through noise. It will be built through obedience, through discernment, and through the quiet strength of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent.